How do I grade Peter Bendix's tenure so far? I'm going to tell you on today's Locked On Marlins.
You are Locked On Marlins, your daily podcast on the Miami Marlins.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Marlins. I'm your host, Jeremiah Geiger. You can find me at Jeremiah Geiger2 over on X. And thank you for making Locked On Marlins your first listen of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel and let me know your thoughts in the comments section. Today's show is, of course, a mailbag. Open the mailbag every Friday, so if you have questions, hit me up. I got a few good ones. I'm going to be talking about them and answering them in today's show. I'm going to be talking about the power output. Where does the power come from in Miami's lineup in 2025? And do the Marlins have their catcher of the future already in the organization? That's all coming up. But of course, I want to remind you that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. The first question of this mailbag is what I'm going to be answering, and it ties into a really good first segment, and that is grading Peter Bendix so far during his tenure as president of baseball operations. It comes from FinsUp3000. Of course, thank you for the question, FinsUp. And he said, question for the pod, if you had to give Bendix a letter grade since he took over, what would you give him? So this is a two-part question for me because you have the off-season Peter Bendix and you have the in-season Peter Bendix. And they're two very different approaches that we've seen so far. So I've been critical of Bendix in the past, and I'm always going to call it how I see it. If I agree with a move, I will be vocal about it. And if I disagree with a move, I'm going to disagree about it. I'm not going to go ahead and agree with everything the organization does. That's just not how I operate. I don't like the inaction that Peter Bendix has taken over the last two off seasons. In terms of adding to the lineup, adding to the rotation, I felt after 2023, when he was named the new president of baseball operations, taking over for Kim Ng, Bendix should have added to the lineup. They went a complete opposite direction, however. And instead, we know now it became a rebuild. They traded away everyone at the deadline. And the only major transaction of last year's offseason was signing Tim Anderson. I didn't like that. But at the deadline, last year's deadline, he executed to a high level some very important trades for the Marlins' future that we're already seeing results of. The Marlins are already reaping the benefits of trade deadline acquisitions that he made. I thought he absolutely killed the deadline. They had the Trevor Rogers trade is the one that stands out. Getting Connor Norby, who is going to be the everyday third baseman for Miami. Getting Kyle Stowers, who is still a player in the Marlins on the Marlins big league roster. Struggles beside the fact he's still playing in the major leagues. So he had two major leaguers for Trevor Rogers. I liked the acquisition of Davison De Los Santos for AJ Puck. There's really no need to keep a bullpen intact when you're a rebuilding team. He trades AJ Puck, gets back the home run king in the minor leagues in De Los Santos. Still a project, but a very exciting project at that. And somebody that theoretically the Marlins can build around. He can become a new cornerstone player if everything works out. The Jazz Chisholm trade. As a fan, I hated seeing Jazz go, but looking at the return, you got some very interesting pieces. You had Jared Cerna, who's one of my favorite players and prospects in the Marlins organization. Extra base machine. You have Agustin Ramirez, who there's questions about his defense, but the hit tool is there. The bat is going to be above average at the major league level if everything works out. All signs point to it. So I really liked the return the Marlins got for trading away who was somebody who was one of the faces of the franchise in Jazz Chisholm, a fan favorite in Miami. That being said, you take a couple trades in the offseason, this past offseason, I really didn't like them. Jesus Luzardo, I felt there was no need to trade him when they did so. Let him get healthy. Instead, they settled for a trade that I felt was underwhelming. Starlin Caba, I like as a prospect. I felt like they could have got more. I did not like the timing of that trade, the execution of that particular move. I did not like trading Jake Burger. We're going to talk about the power and where does it come from in the next segment, but Jake Burger's gone. That was your power bat. He had multiple years of control, I believe 4 or 5 years left of control, and the Marlins traded him away, ship him off to Texas. You did not need to do that. There was no need to trade him unless you felt like the return you're going to get for him was absolutely otherworldly and you really, really liked the prospects you got back. Maybe you do. Maybe internally the Marlins felt like that was the best they were going to get for Jake Burger, headlined by Max Acosta and Echedri Vargas, but I personally wouldn't have made that deal. That upset me. The other issue with Peter Bendix and his time here in Miami is clarity with the fans. That transparency that a front office and ownership gives to their fan base. We pay money. We invest our time and energy into this team. The fans want to know the plan. They don't like being spoken to like a politician would. And last offseason, when Peter Bendix says, we have one eye on the future, one eye on the present, that obviously was not true because they didn't do anything to improve the roster. The major league roster, they did nothing. They traded Arias early on in May. I was vocal about that I did not like that trade as well. Just be transparent with the fan base. That is the one thing that I think Bendix can improve immensely on, is clarifying, honesty, transparency with the fan base. Don't alienate yourself away from us fans. Everything when he speaks, it seems to be the most basic, common answers, not really answering the media's question, which so many front office members do. So many general managers do that with the press. But that is something that I don't necessarily like. Off-season grade for Peter Bendix, man, that's tough because I don't want to be too harsh. I understand what he's doing in the rebuild, but I got to give it a C minus. The C minus comes from the fact that you didn't get enough for Luzardo, you didn't get enough for Jake Burger, but you did sign Cal Quantrill, which was a huge necessity at this point. And in season, I'm a little bit more high on him. I think his in-season moves, getting guys like Otto Lopez off the waiver wire, the trade deadline, which I talked about, I think those are all very positive moves. I'm going to give it a B, a solid B so far, because if De Los Santos, Agustin Ramirez debut in Miami, that's huge. And that's a win for Bendix going back to last season. Otto Lopez is an absolute breakout player who broke out last year. Can he continue that this year? His defense is elite. I like Otto Lopez, and that was a waiver wire acquisition. So in season, I'm going to give it a B. Off season, I'm giving it a C minus. Right now, you combine the two, and we got to hit the ad in a second. But I'm going to go C plus because I'm willing to see what happens this season. I'm willing to see if those trade deadline moves and Connor Norby and everybody manages to produce for the Marlins at the major league level. We're going to talk about Otto Lopez, had another question on him and his Gold Glove defense right after this break. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. You would love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether it's backing your team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, you never feel like you miss your chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. If you're an everyday listener, thank you for being a part of the Locked On Marlins crew. We have to come up with a nickname for you guys, all the everyday listeners who are with me on this YouTube channel, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your pods and listen or watch the show. We got to come up with a nickname for the Marlins crew, the Locked On Marlins crew. I think that would be fun. And of course, if this is your first episode, thank you for tuning in. We'll be here every single weekday on Locked On Marlins, bringing you the best Marlins content, news, rumors, everything about the team. This is your show to get that. Otto Lopez. He was one of Peter Bendix's wins of last season, getting him off the waiver wire. And he turned into a very productive player at second base with the departure of Luis Arias. That really opened the door for Otto Lopez to come in and make his mark. And the biggest thing to know about Otto Lopez is his defense is absolutely elite. And I have a question from William Corpus. Reminder, Friday is the episode to get your questions answered here on Locked On Marlins. William Corpus says, does Otto Lopez win a gold glove in 2025? Wow. That is a bold question because there are so many other great second basemen in the National League. But you know what? Defensively, Otto Lopez is one of them. From a statistical standpoint, when you look at the analytics and the metrics of defensive runs saved, outs above average, and you really dive into that, there's no reason why Otto Lopez can't win a gold glove. I do believe that he absolutely has the potential to over a full 162 game season. The issue, though, is that I don't think he's going to get enough recognition nationally. In terms of Major League Baseball as a whole, the Marlins are expected to be a bad team. And in fact, I don't think, unless you're a diehard Marlins fan, a lot of people necessarily know who Otto Lopez is. Of course, the real ball knowers do and understand how good he is defensively, but he's a lesser known player, to put it bluntly, among Major League Baseball as a whole. So for him to win a gold glove, he's going to really have to stand out. And I think the Marlins will have to exceed expectations. We see that a lot when it comes to individual awards across sports. Team success usually comes with that as well. It's a little bit different in baseball, of course, but I think Otto Lopez has to be one of the elite defenders across the board and really stand out. But great question, and thank you again for the question. The power output for the Marlins. Vic Box the Base says, does anyone hit 25 or more home runs for the Marlins in 2025? When the Marlins traded Jake Berger, that was their power bat. That was their proven guy who could go out and hit 30 home runs a year. I mean, he's done it before. He's done it multiple times. In fact, he was, I believe, one shy last season of hitting another 30 home run campaign, having that 30 home run season. And the Marlins traded him away. Marlins trade him away to the Rangers, and now you're looking at guys who have been here for a while, like Jesus Sanchez, and guys who have debuted last season, like Griffin Conine, but who have the reputation to be that strong power bat to really take the next level and replace that power from Jake Burger. We saw that in 2023 when they traded away, or rather did not re-sign Jorge Soler. The question was, how are the Marlins going to replace his power? And it was an idea of Jake Burger and Josh Bell together is going to replace the power that Soler brought to the team. And now fast forward a year later, and we have the same question with Jake Burger. Where does that power come from into Miami's lineup? Griffin Conine is a player who comes to mind just based off his minor league numbers, but there's no guarantee that he's going to be starting every day for the Marlins. We're going to have to wait for spring training and the competitions to settle that out. If he makes the team, is it as a starter in left? Is he coming off the bench? Jesus Sanchez is the guy who, if he puts it all together, and for the everyday listeners out there, couple shows back, I talked about if Jesus Sanchez can figure out how to hit lefties and take those strides against left-handed pitchers and force his way into the lineup every single day with the exit velocity and just the sheer power he brings, the raw power, there's a path for Jesus Sanchez to be a 25 home run guy. I know he has it in him. He just hasn't put it all together yet. Behind Conine and Jesus Sanchez, though, the profiles of the Marlins who I expect to be on the opening day roster just don't scream big power bats. They don't have, that's not really their game. Xavier Edwards, contact hitter. Otto Lopez, not a lot of power. Connor Norby, now he says he wants 30 home runs this year. Is he a 30 home run player in the major leagues? I don't know. That would be awesome. I'm here for it if Norby can hit 30 home runs, but it's to be determined with him. Again, last season, he hit 7 when he came over from Baltimore, and that was just over half a season. If I have to predict, he's more of a 15 to 20 home run guy. Hit for average, sacrifice a little bit more power for the average. If you're hitting 280 as Connor Norby with 30 doubles and 19 home runs, I love that. I don't see him being a 30 home run guy yet, but that is a dark horse name who could theoretically show some strides in the power department this season. Besides all those guys I mentioned, though, I don't think the Marlins are going to have that true power threat who's guaranteed to make up for what Burger brought to the table. I don't think De Los Santos is going to start opening day. That's just how I think the Marlins are going to handle him. I want him to have a productive spring and be on the opening day roster. That would be really exciting, because if he does, then there's the potential for him to hit 30, 35, 40 home runs. The thing with De Los Santos is the strikeout and chase rates are so bad right now, and something he really needs to work on. Otherwise, it's not going to matter, and he's going to get carved up by Major League pitching. The Marlins do historically, over the last few years, they've had a lack of power. So they're going to have to step up in that department somehow this season. But when you look down the road, there's a power hitting catcher in the minor leagues. Played all season in Double-A last year. His name's Joe Mack. I think he could be the catcher of the future, bring the power, bring the offense, and stick behind the plate. I'm going to talk to you about why I think that coming up next. Thank you again for listening or watching the podcast wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify. You can listen in the gym, in the car, wherever you're going. Take Locked On Marlins with you. Watch on YouTube. And of course, recommend to your friends, recommend to other Marlins fans who haven't heard about the pod. Let them hop in, join the comments, join the Locked On Marlins crew. Got to come up with a nickname for you guys, for all you everyday listeners out there. So let's talk about the catcher of the future, who I think the Marlins have in their organization, and that's Joe Mack. Yes, I think Joe Mack can be the Marlins franchise catcher. And I think he's still probably a year away from making his debut in Miami, but I really like what I've seen out of him offensively. Last season in Double-A, man, led the Southern League, the pitcher-friendly Southern League, in extra base hits with 47. Second in home runs with 22. And this was a huge improvement to his 2023 campaign, where honestly he struggled in high A rather. He didn't make his Double-A debut until last year. In high A in 2023 with Beloit, he hit 218, only had 6 home runs, and then out of nowhere, the power just comes up. 22 home runs for Double-A Pensacola, which is a pitcher's friendly league, remember. So Joe Mack had an absolute breakout season last year, and he's solid defensively. We've talked about Agustin Ramirez as being a potential catcher of the future. I don't think he sticks behind the plate. I do think Joe Mack can stick behind the plate. He's got a real strong arm, and he's good at blocking pitches. He's going to be an above average defensive catcher, in my prediction. When you have that profile as a guy who can catch and who's projected to continue catching until he makes a major leagues, and then you add that offense for a team that has had a black hole at the position since JT Realmuto was traded away in that infamous trade with the Phillies. That is music to our ears. This season, I am so excited for Joe Mack's development and watching him in big league camp. Of course, he's a non-roster invite. He's not going to make the opening day roster. He's going to develop, but he's getting those at-bats. He's down in Jupiter getting those live ABs off live arms, and he's going to be playing in spring training games. And that to me, I love seeing that. I think the Marlins right now, with the catchers they have going into opening day, on the 40-man, of course, Agustin Ramirez, we've talked about him. We've talked about that he's probably not going to debut opening day, and I don't think the Marlins are going to necessarily rush the issue, and certainly not behind the plate, because they have Liam Hicks and Nick Fortes. Liam Hicks, really intriguing move the Marlins made over the offseason, over the winter in the Rule 5 draft, when they selected Liam Hicks to be on their 26-man roster for the whole season, unless something goes wrong and it's just not working out, because he hasn't played above Double-A, which I think is really interesting. You're taking a gamble on a player in the Rule 5 draft who you have to keep on the major league roster. So Nick Fortes, of course, is the Marlins veteran catcher of the group. He's been here for a few years now. He knows the pitching staff. What I did think was interesting, though, is that he's never caught Sandy Alcantara. Never. And I was surprised by that at first. It was a tweet from the Fish on First guys that Sandy Alcantara has never thrown to Nick Fortes in a game. Remember, though, Nick Fortes in 2023 shared duties with Jacob Stallings, and Jacob Stallings would always catch Sandy. And of course, Jacob Stallings departs the organization. Sandy Alcantara has offseason surgery. Tommy John misses all of last year. And that was when Nick Fortes was catcher number 1. I still expect Nick Fortes to be the number 1 catcher for the Marlins in 25. I do think that if he struggles offensively, you're going to hear clamoring for more Liam Hicks time. He's a lefty hitter. He's got good bat to ball skills. The hit tool has been solid throughout his time with college. The pride of Arkansas State, the Red Wolves, Liam Hicks. So will it translate into the major leagues? We'll see, because again, he hasn't played AAA baseball, only AA. So it's really interesting to see how the Marlins are going to split the catching duties this season with Fortes, Liam Hicks, and do they give Agustin Ramirez a shot if he shows substantial improvement? That is going to be very interesting this spring. If he does show substantial improvement, do they give him a shot? Or in the back of their mind, do they already have a plan with him as possibly moving him to first base or designated hitter? I think they probably have an idea which avenue they're going to go, but you exhaust all opportunity with Agustin Ramirez to stick behind the plate just because offensive catchers who are a rarity in Major League Baseball. It's so hard to find an everyday catcher who's adequate and then above average with the stick. But Joe Mack, going back to him, could be the catcher of the future. In a year's time from now, we could be looking at going into 2026, where Joe Mack's entering spring training right on the doorstep of Major League Baseball. If he has a good 2025, I don't know if he's going to start out at AA. They're going to promote him to AAA. I would like to see him get experience in both. But if he can translate the power and the extra base hits, the doubles and the home runs, and he can translate that for another full season, and he's still solid defensively, wow, I'm going to be really excited. Because you could see Nick Fortes right now is that stopgap. He's not necessarily the long-term plan here as the Marlins catcher. They haven't had a long-term catcher since JT Realmuto. I mean, think about the names the Marlins have gone through behind the plate. Sandy Leon. I mean, Jacob Stallings was supposed to be a guy they signed from Pittsburgh. I believe they traded for him with the Pittsburgh Pirates, and he just flamed out completely offensively. So the Marlins are desperate to find their catcher of the future and somebody that they can build around. This season is all about cornerstones and finding who your future cornerstones will be for the next Marlins, competitive team, for that next playoff team. Again, accelerating the rebuild. That's a term I use a lot here on the pod. You don't want to stick in a situation where you can't find guys at crucial positions. Those crucial positions you need on a major league team. Shortstop, you need a good pitching staff, of course. It starts and ends always with the rotation. And you need a good catcher. If you have prospects who you feel good about internally and who can project into those roles in an everyday sense, moving forward down the road, then you're going to be in a good spot, and the rebuild accelerates. It doesn't stay stagnant. Joe Mack, guys, watch his highlights. He hits rockets, absolute rockets off his bat. Next week on the podcast, I'm going to have a couple guests, I hope. I know at least one. He's familiar to you Marlins fans. It's going to be a great episode as we head further into spring training. Reminder, the games are just 9 days away. Look at that. February 14th, Valentine's Day. We have games February 22nd. So 8 days away. Guys, it's going to be awesome. I'm going to be here every step of the way on Locked On Marlins. Thank you guys for listening and, of course, making this your first listen of the day. Your team every day. Marlins fans, Locked On Marlins crew, stay safe and let's go fish.